If this is how I've always been, and I always knew and was convinced without a doubt that I was right, and now I don't believe that anymore, how can I ever know that anything is right again?
Sophie went through a spiritual awakening in her 50s when a book triggered questions that her church censored her for. Her father had been a pastor and head of a seminary. Her brother, brother-in-law, and son-in-law were also pastors. She and her husband were completely grounded in the church in both belief and decades of practice, until she began to deconstruct her religious identity. It was a quest that would take her through loneliness, heartache, and eventually joy. Welcome to this episode of Waylighter's Spiritual Awakening and Emergence podcast. I wanted to talk with you a little bit about your awakening process in terms of leaving the church and beginning to pursue an alternative spirituality.
I would go by the library and check their new book section pretty regularly and just read whatever caught my interest. And there was a book called Love Wins by Rob Bell, who was an evangelical pastor who ended up getting fired from his church over this book that he wrote. And the book basically talked about how there was no hell, that God did not send people to hell. And I was so fascinated by this book. And at the time, I was still very involved in the Wesleyan Church. I actually taught an adult Sunday school class. My Sunday school class was very small, and we would read books. And so I told them about this book, and I told them that I was really interested in this book. And they said, yeah, let's make that our next book. So I went to the director of Christian education and I just said, hey, I just want you to know that this is the book that we were going to study next. And he came back to me, and this is a really young guy, like he was barely older than my kids, right? And he came back to me and said, oh, no, you can't study this book. Or if you're going to study this book in Sunday school, you have to also study this other book that was written solely to disprove the book that we want to study. And I was like, huh. So I went back to my Sunday school class and I told them it, and they all said, well, we're all adults. We can do what we want. Let's just do it anyway. So we did. And what was interesting is we ended up moving into a new facility while we were in the middle of studying that book, and they canceled my Sunday school class in the new facility. They shut my Sunday school class down. Yeah. So then I watched this maybe on Netflix called I Am. They talk about energy. They talk about quantum physics. And Bruce Lipton talks a lot about spiritual things, but also about science. I watched the movie, then I watched it again, and I started writing down the names of these people and the books that they had published. I am not exaggerating when I say I probably read 200 books in a year. I thought that I was going to find a different truth. I was looking outside myself. A lot of what I went through was a really major existential crisis, an identity crisis of if this is how I've always been, and I always knew and was convinced without a doubt that I was right, and now I don't believe that anymore, how can I ever know that anything is right again? How can I ever be? And I went through years of being unwilling to commit to anything, or not even knowing how. I mean, it really took a lot of therapy and a lot of time for me to work through all that. I mean, I would say it took me close to 10 years. Our whole lives outside of work revolved around the church. Yeah. I mean, we were always there. We socialized with people in the church. We spent a lot of our free time doing things with the church, and churches are structured that way on purpose. And for us, a lot of it was also family. In addition to the church. So about the time you met me, when I started the training program, was about the time when I was feeling pretty solid in my identity and who I wanted to be. And the fact that I was willing to step out and say, I want to coach people who are going through this, because I didn't have any real support. Yeah. I didn't have support from people who understood what I was experiencing. Yeah. Have left the church. You know, it's one thing to have a spiritual awakening and come into a new knowledge, but it's another thing to have a spiritual awakening and have to deconstruct all your prior life and everything. So, you know, between being worried about what my family is going to think, being worried about what my kids were going to think, being worried about losing my grandchildren, just being afraid of running into church people in public and having to have conversations with them. And, I mean, it was really, really, really hard. And then on top of all this, I was having these experiences. I was having a lot of psychic experiences, and I was having just things that really frightened me because I had no prior contacts for them. And I didn't know how to process it. And I was still, dealing with, I think, multiple lifetimes of guilt from the church. And just that whole hell scenario and evil scenario. And it's like in my head, I knew that I didn't believe that, but my nervous system was so fried and so struggling. So I was reaching out for any help I could find, honestly. I was sitting in the healing circle one night, sending out healing to different people that people had shared about that needed healing. And then she said, just visualize yourself like a straw, that you're just the channel that healing is going through. And all of a sudden, boom, I was in a different place. I was, like, from an objective perspective, watching this young woman who had just started her first menses. She's a very young girl, walking, and she was naked, and it was a ceremony, but I could feel what she was feeling. So it's like I was her, but I was seeing her from an external perspective. And she was walking into the river, because the ceremony was that on your first menses, you go into the river and you let your blood flow to heal the earth. It was such a profound experience. And I mean, it was like I was in a different place. I was not sitting in that group. And it was so real. It was so real. And then all of a sudden, boom, I was back in the group. And I was just like, holy shit, what just happened? I'm supposed to be doing this healing ceremony. And, it scared me to death, just like everything else. Because it was almost like a light turned on. It wasn't like I gradually came into this. It was like once that lightning hit and I started putting things together, and then it was just like I was barreling down the highway. And I went through a year of severe depression because I couldn't figure out how to do life.
Yeah, that is actually that is something that I am hearing, and certainly I experienced myself.
I did the Reiki. I did all the angel reading classes for like 2 years. I did Amadeus, and all of that, in some ways, validating a lot of abilities that I already had and didn't know how to define, or didn't know how to categorize or apply. And it just made me start feeling safer with the things that I could see, and the things that I know, and the things that I recognize and understand that not everybody else necessarily does.
How did your truth of yourself change? It's been you've gone through this amazing exploration, and I know that you've just given the tip of the iceberg here for the experiences that you went through and all that you read and all that you've learned from others as well. But I'm curious about how your view of who you are changed.
Well, my view of who I am is totally different from what it was 12 or 13 years ago when this started. I was very empathic my whole life, and I didn't even know what an empath was until 12 years ago. I was aware of a lot of things that it's really hard if you know that somebody is not being truthful, but you have no way to prove that they're not being truthful. And then other people tell you that you're wrong, and you learn to question yourself on everything, and you learn to doubt yourself on everything. And you have very little self-confidence, because for most of your life, what you have perceived, when you have communicated it to other people, they have told you how you were wrong. So when I first started this awakening experience, I was a very fearful person. I always worried about what everybody else thought. I was always looking for the truth and reality as defined by other people.
Yeah.
and then trying to make my life fit that. That goes through a lot of things, including, coming from a dysfunctional family, coming out of the church. It was a perfect storm in terms of learning to not trust yourself. And I suppose the biggest change in me is that I do trust myself now. I do believe that I'm a good person. I don't constantly feel afraid of what's going to happen next because I trust my perceptions now. And also, I was a very, very judgmental person. Because in the same way that I felt very judged and unsafe, it was the church in particular is a very judgmental organization internally, as well as judgmental of people outside the organization, and also in my family. And I have, in my realization that who I am is not perfect, but completely acceptable and fine, and
Yes.
and who I'm supposed to be and meant to be.
And beautiful, I'll just say, knowing you.
Thank you. But it's taken away the need for me to judge other people, because it's not about comparing yourself to other people, So up until the past few years, I felt like everybody I ever encountered was better than I was.
Yeah.
And I no longer feel that way. I don't feel like I'm better than they are. I see people totally different now. And I mean, from a spiritual perspective, you could say I've lost a lot of ego. But honestly, ego is all of those unhealthy relationships and unhealthy comparisons to other people. And you either come out better than other people or worse than other people. You never come out happy. You never come out peaceful or content.
Yeah.
And I am now very peaceful and very content. I'm so content. Sometimes I worry that I'm just not motivated to do very much, but I listen for guidance and I pay attention to guidance. And when I don't have that guidance, I am content with where I am here and now. And that is a totally different person from who I used to be. The other thing that happened to me early on when I first started waking up, I became aware that I was a person that fixed everything for everybody. Because if I could, this is partly about being empathic. If you can make other people happy, then you can be happy. And if they're not happy, you can't be happy.
I know this one.
Yeah. And I don't feel the compulsion to fix other people's problems anymore.
Yeah.
And also, I don't feel like I'm a bad person if I don't.
What advice would you have for someone who feels that beginning awakening experience?
I felt so alone in terms of not having people who really, I mean, I had friends, but I didn't have friends who had left the Christian church. And so for me, a huge part of my awakening experience was getting out of the Christian church. And I met the woman that I ended up doing spiritual direction with for a number of years. She was a retired psychotherapist who helped me so much because, I mean, in a lot of ways, she was just kind of like a supportive mother figure. Like, you're okay. You are okay. You're not crazy. There's nothing wrong with you. You have amazing gifts, and it's okay to use them. It's safe to use them. What I would tell someone if they were awakening is try to find somebody who genuinely wants to help you. And there are a lot of therapists who have enough insight to be supportive of a spiritual awakening. There's so many, I don't know. Some of the organizations that I listened to a lot of recordings from that were really helpful for me was the Institute for Noetic Sciences and Sounds True. Hay House has a lot of good stuff too. Go to a yoga studio or go to a meditation group. I think those are safe, generally safe.
I think the communication is really important when someone is just kind of starting to emerge. And that's what I've started calling this after having talked to a number of people is I've started out talking about, tell me about your spiritual awakening. And then there's this emergence process, in terms of the important people in your life and talking with them about your experiences. Any thoughts on like what helped you, what didn't help, like what you wouldn't want to do again or to have happen again?
That was just it. I didn't feel safe telling anybody. And even when she left her husband and moved in with us in 2020,
Your daughter.
Yes, she was still a Christian, and I still did not tell her. I mean, I had all these books, and every time they would come over, I'd have to run around the house and hide all the books. I mean, it was that.
I get that. That.
I had to like, is there any like smudge sticks sitting out, or are there, too many crystals sitting around, or, I mean, it was that significant. I think one thing that's important is that if you are coming out of a religion that emphasizes conformity, that it's important to allow yourself to experience whatever you're experiencing without judgment or without feeling, oh, I'm not. See, for me, coming out of the Christian church, I was always trying to find the right way to do things, the right way to meditate, the right way to, the right way to do these things. And it took me years to figure out that the whole point is that it's inside me. It's not outside. I kept looking for another external authority to give me the new framework that I needed to follow. And after a few years, I realized that's not how it works, And once I really started meditating, every time I would go into meditation with a question, by the time I got done, it was like, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It's not important.
I love that. Can you put words to that truth that you discovered inside of you?
Well, it's not a truth.
Yes.
It's the truth for any moment. It's not like, here's the big theory of everything. And, Greg Braden teaches this, and this is also really closely related to heart math. And heart math is where you focus on heart-brain coherence, and they provide a means with biofeedback for you to strengthen heart-brain coherence. But basically, you drop into your heart, and your heart will always give you the right answer. And it can be a question about anything. Should I get on this airplane? Should I eat this? Is this a person I want to enter into a relationship with? It can be a question about anything. People are just in a point of looking around at the surreality around them and saying, I've got to find a different context. I've got to find a different way of seeing things because the old way just isn't working anymore.
The old way is not working anymore, and yet there's that fear of the complexity of not having someone to tell you what the rules are, just as you said. It's like, I know it's not working anymore, but can somebody else just tell me what it actually is?
Not exactly.
Well, to the point of your journey, that's what you had to come to terms with.
There are really useful resources outside you, but the ultimate truth is within you, and you will never have the whole truth if you don't learn to go within.
Beautiful. As always. Thank you.
As is always the message at Waylighters, you don't have to go through challenges alone. For local help working through religious deconstruction, there's a localized directory of assistance at religiostraumainstitute.com. Until next time, wishing you peace on your journey.